To address the issues facing Tennesseans today, from 10 News, this is Inside Tennessee.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to Inside Tennessee. I'm your moderator, John Becker, along with my colleague, John North with WBIR. Also, our two panelists in studio, Susan Richardson-Williams. She's a Republican, runs her own PR firm. Don Bosch, a Democrat, runs his own law firm. It's great to have both of you with us today.
Nice to be back live.
It's been a while.
How about this?
Yes, indeed. Our guest this morning is somebody who managed the election this week, and that is Chris Davis, the elections coordinator in Knox County. Great to have you with us, Chris. And you're here because we're going to break down turnout to begin this broadcast as we look at the last election, this primary we had this week. What can you say about overall turnout and who did vote?
First off, glad to be here. Thank you for the invite. We had about 38,100 vote, which was lower than I expected, lower than we planned for. I was expecting somewhere in that 40 to 42,000 range, given that we had an incumbent mayor and an incumbent sheriff. I thought turnout would be a little lower than it was 4 years ago, and that turned out to be the case. But it was even lower than I thought it would be by a good 3,000 or 4,000. And I don't know that I have a really strong explanation for that. It's just, it was, we had good weather on election day, which I thought might help turnout on election day. And that really didn't seem to be the case. It was steady, but it was slow.
Yeah, you've said 292,000 voters registered roughly in the county, so that's really only 13%. So if you look at it just numbers-wise, out of every 10 voters, one took time to cast a ballot. Not very great, but we did see some evidence, Chris, of crossover voting. And why do you know that? And when I say that, you don't register for party in the state of Tennessee, but in a primary, you do select whether you vote in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary. Why do you say there was crossover?
Well, typically in Knox County elections, you're generally speaking, your margin if you have a Republican and a Democrat in the same office on the ballot. And obviously, it's going to depend if maybe it's a district race, but generally speaking, it's going to be anywhere between 60-40 to 68-32, somewhere in there, Republican and Democrat. And yet, when you look at the total number of ballots pulled, particularly, I'm just talking right now about early voting and absentee, it was about 80% Republican, 20% Democratic, and maybe 79-21, 78-22 when we get through counting all of election day's ballots and verifying everything. But that tells me that, and anecdotally, we heard this as well. I know there were just people who were, in some cases, bragging about crossing over and voting. But the fact is, under state law, as you mentioned, no one registers by party. And so when the people come into the polling place, prospective voter, we ask them, in which primary do you wish to vote? And so we can just tell there was crossover voting because the difference between Republican and Democrat was a lot higher than you would normally see in a countywide election.
One other foundational question, then I'll open it up to our panel. But let's look at the vote between Election Day and early vote. Early vote winning as far as the number of voters who actually took time to vote in the days before the election, Chris.
That's correct. And that's pretty typical in most elections in Knox County or the city of Knoxville. We're generally, we strive, I will tell you, at the Election Commission here in Knox County, we promote early voting heavily. A great election for us is 70% or more that vote early. This one, it looks like, is going to end up being somewhere in the 57-58% range that voted early and 42-43 that voted on election day. And that generally you will see in Knox County elections. Early voting and absentee will be higher than election day, with the exception of your March presidential primary, because generally speaking, voters wait until election day to determine who's dropped out of a presidential primary before he or she casts his or her ballot.
So, I'll comment on Chris's comment about the breakdown on Republicans and Democrats. And Chris, I of course agree with your figures of what it traditionally is. But if you look at the Democratic ballot, there were only 2 races on that entire ballot that were contested. One school board race, and then for the county mayor. And even the county mayor's race were 3 candidates, one known to the Democratic Party pretty well, and Debbie Helsley, who won by a fairly convincing margin. But the other 2 candidates were not very well known amongst the Democratic Party. And so there was not much generation of excitement to vote in that race. I of course voted in the Democratic primary, and it took me all of about 90 seconds to complete a ballot.
Susan, your questions for Chris?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious about the paper ballots. Talk about that and why we went back to paper ballots. And it took me a long time because you have to fill in your little block. And how do we know for sure going through that scanner that our ballots counted? I mean, are y'all confident of that?
Very much so. We have a team of Republicans and Democrats that program every machine, and we do what's called a logic and accuracy test prior to every election, as well as a public machine test where we have candidates are invited, political party chairs are and/or their designees are invited to actually watch us go through a little sample election, if you will, with a precinct. We choose ballots. We make sure that we have overvotes in every race, undervotes in every race. Some where we try and mess with the box a little bit to make sure, if you only check a certain percentage of the box or color in a certain percentage of the box, that vote will or won't count. And we do that prior to every election. And, it's interesting because I've heard a lot of this, particularly since November of 2020. I hear this question quite a bit. And I'll be honest with you, we don't have the slightest bit of concern. My concern always is I want people to turn out because I don't like thin margins, low margins. I want, and we were very fortunate in this election that we had pretty much every election. I think the closest election we had in a contested race was the Butler-Fraser school board race, which was 100 and some votes, give or take. But my fear, as always, is going to be you come down to election night and do you have a race that's 1, 5, 10, 15 votes? So that's my concern. But the scanner works fine. And although we're always going to have questions about that, one of the things I encourage people to do, and I'm dead serious about this, if you are, and we've gotten a few election workers out of this, is if you're skeptical of the process, come work for us. And I'm serious when I say that because I would love to put you to work. I would love to let you see the behind the scenes of what we do and how we do it and the steps that we take to make sure that your vote is secure.
Chris, I think this was Susan's way of asking if the cyber ninjas could arrive in your office. Don't do it.
Chris Davis, the Administrator of Elections in Knox County, we appreciate your work. Thank you for the breakdown as well. Always great to see you, and we'll hope more people turn out in August. And have a good rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you back here soon.
Folks, thank you very much.
We're going to break down the election with this crew when we come back right here on Inside Tennessee.